Number 3. Kelly Cook. In 1981, 15-year-old Kelly Cook lived with her family in the village of Standard, Alberta. At around 8:20 on the morning of April 22nd, a man called the house looking for Kelly. He said that his name was Bill Christensen and he was looking for a babysitter for the night. Kelly agreed and Christensen arranged to pick her up at her house. At 8:30 that night, a man pulled into the family's driveway. He didn't get out and he just waited for Kelly to walk out to the car. Kelly's mother saw the man through a window, but she didn't go out to meet him. After getting into the car, the man drove off. Hours later, Kelly still hadn't returned home, and her parents became frantic. They called the police, but unfortunately, they had very little information to give them about the man who picked up their daughter. All they knew was that the man said that his name was Bill Christensen. Christensen is a fairly common name in the area. Kelly's mother was also able to describe the man, and it resulted in these 2 police sketches. She couldn't remember anything specific about the car, except that it was a full-size North American car. 40 police officers and over 600 volunteers looked for Kelly, but no trace of her could be found. As the police investigated, they learned that a month or 2 before the kidnapping, 11 other girls in the county received phone calls from a man looking for a babysitter. The caller never told the girls where they would be babysitting, he just offered to pick them up. The girls also said that the man was calling from a payphone outside of Standard. Each girl had a reason for not being able to babysit for the man. When the man said his name, he said it really fast, so the girls weren't sure what he said his name was. Some of them thought that he said his name was Peter. The police considered the possibility that it could be an honest coincidence. They checked out everyone in the area named Peter to see if he was looking for a babysitter. None of the Peters that they interviewed said that they made the calls. So the police are fairly certain that the caller is most likely the man who kidnapped Kelly. One of these calls was made to Kelly's friend 4 days before Kelly went missing. Like the other girls, she couldn't babysit. She recommended Kelly for the job, and she gave him Kelly's phone number. 2 months later, Kelly's body was found in a canal over 165 miles away from Standard. She had been tied up, and her body was weighed down with 2 concrete blocks. Her body had to be identified using her dental records. Kelly was fully clothed, and she had not been sexually assaulted. If the cause of death is known, it has never been made public. The man who picked her up is described as 30 to 45 years old. He was about 5'10", he had a medium to heavy build, and he had dark hair. The RCMP say that Kelly's case is open, but it's cold. Both the RCMP and Kelly's family are hopeful that one day her murder will be solved. Number 2. Glacia, Ramsey, and Peaches Christberg. The night of December 12, 2003 was a cold, clear night in Cleveland, Ohio. On that night, Iona Davis was babysitting her 2 nieces, 7-year-old Glacia Ramsey and her younger sister, 2-year-old Peaches Christberg. Just before 10 o'clock, Glacia and Peaches were in bed sleeping, and Davis was lounging around the apartment that was part of a 4-unit house. Suddenly, a man dressed in a hooded sweatshirt burst into the apartment. He forced Davis into the bathroom and locked her in. Minutes later, Davis smelled smoke. She managed to break out of the bathroom and saw that the fire had spread quickly, so she got out of the apartment. A neighbor tried to get into the building to find the girls, but the fire was too intense. Glacia and Peaches were found in their beds by the fire department. They were taken to the hospital, where they died a few hours later. The cause of death was smoke inhalation. The fire department determined that the fire was an act of arson. The fire was started in one of the main floor units of the house using charcoal or lighter fluid. One of the biggest mysteries for the investigators was what was the motive. The police couldn't figure out why someone would want to hurt the family or burn down the building. In the 5 years preceding the fire, the police had only been called to the house once. That call was made 1 week before the fire. They were called because the girl's mother had been robbed at gunpoint outside the house. At the time of this video, the arsonist who was responsible for the deaths of Glacia Ramsey and Peaches Christberg has yet to be brought to justice. Number 1. Janett Christman. March 18, 1950 was a stormy night in Columbia, Missouri. At around 11 p.m., a call came in to the local police station. An officer answered the phone and he immediately heard a young woman screaming, and then the line went dead. The officer tried his best to track down the caller, but since it was 1950, he wasn't able to find them. Around 1:35 a.m., Ed and Ann Romack walked into their remote home that was in an undeveloped area just outside of Columbia. They had been at a bridge party at a restaurant. They called out to the babysitter, 13-year-old Janett Christman, but there was no answer. They checked in on their son, 3-year-old Gregory, and he was asleep in his bed. They went into the living room and found Janett in a pool of blood beside the baby grand piano. An autopsy showed that Janett had been beaten and raped. She also had round puncture wounds in her scalp. The cause of death was asphyxiation. She had been strangled to death with an electrical cord that was cut from an iron. The cord wasn't ripped out of the iron, instead it was cut with a pair of scissors. An officer with the city police arrived at the crime scene first. This led to a problem that would plague the entire investigation. The Romacks' home was just outside the city limits, and this put their house in the jurisdiction of the sheriff's office. Both police forces said that they were in charge of the case, and they developed two completely different theories on what happened. The window above the piano had been broken with a garden hoe. This led the city police to think that the killer was a prowler. He broke the window, climbed through it, and then he climbed over the piano. The city police started rounding up suspects, mostly young black men, looking to see if any of them had scratches or marks on them. The sheriff's department didn't think that scenario was likely. The piano had recently been waxed, and there were no signs of anyone climbing over it. Instead, they thought that the killer came in through the front door. They also thought that he was familiar with the house. Only one room was disturbed, and that was the living room. The killer got the iron and the scissors from a sewing room down the hallway. Since there were no other disturbances, it seemed like the killer knew where the iron and the scissors were located. Janett may have known her killer, because she probably wouldn't have let a stranger into the house. The Romacks were interviewed and they suggested a suspect, a friend of Ed Romack's from high school, 27-year-old Robert Mueller. Ann Romack told them several stories of Mueller inappropriately touching her. Mueller also knew Janett. She babysat for him and his wife. Mueller had attended the same party as the Romacks, and he had asked Janett to babysit for him. She couldn't because the Romacks asked her first. That meant that Mueller knew that Janett was going to be alone at the Romacks. Mueller was familiar with the Romacks' house, and he had used their sewing room because he had a custom-made suit. Mueller was known to carry a mechanical pencil, and according to lab tests, it could have been the instrument that made the round cuts on Janett's scalp. Finally, even though Mueller was at the party, people noticed that he was missing for over an hour. There were several problems with the theory about Mueller being the killer. The first is that Janett put up quite a fight before she died. Mueller didn't have any scratches or cuts on him. Also, people at the party didn't notice anything off about Mueller. The sheriff decided to question Mueller, but he did something odd. Instead of taking Mueller to their headquarters, the sheriff took him to his deputy's farmhouse outside of the city. The sheriff spent all night interviewing Mueller, and in the morning, Mueller agreed to take a polygraph test. Mueller said that he didn't kill Janett, and he passed. Mueller wasn't charged with the murder. Instead, a grand jury was convened, and the circumstantial evidence against him was presented. After all the evidence was presented, the jury chose not to indict Mueller. Instead, they condemned the sheriff's department and the city police for not working together. There were rumors around the city that bribes were paid to either the jury or the prosecuting attorney, Carl Sapp. There is also speculation that Sapp threw the case because he hated the sheriff. After the grand jury, Mueller sued the sheriff's office, but lost 3 years later. Shortly after Janett's murder, he joined the Air Force and he moved his family out of state. He retired from the Air Force and he died in July 2006 at the age of 83. Today, he is considered the strongest suspect in the murder of Janett Christman. But that is just one of several attacks that Mueller is suspected of committing. Another one happened on February 5th, 1946, almost 4 years before Janett was killed. 19-year-old Mary Lou Jenkins was home alone in Columbia. Her mother was spending the night next door at the home of some elderly neighbors. She had been raped and strangled to death with an electrical cord from a lamp. Then in 1949, several days before Halloween, a 16-year-old babysitter was raped in a home in Columbia. Luckily, she was left alive. The victim said that the rapist was wearing a mask that was a white sack with eye holes cut into it. A month later, 18-year-old Sally Johnson was dozing on her couch while her parents were out of town. She was attacked, but she was able to escape unharmed. A major difference between those attacks and the one on Janett is that arrests were made in those cases. Floyd Cochran, a 34-year-old black man, supposedly confessed to the murder of Mary Lou Jenkins after confessing to the murder of his wife. He was executed for Mary Lou's murder in 1947. It was later revealed that Cochran did not admit nor deny responsibility for Mary Lou's murder. Jake Bradford, a 26-year-old black man, was convicted of sexual assault and attempted sexual assault. Bradford appealed his convictions and said that he had been coerced into confessing. He was questioned over 10 hours and he was threatened with mob violence. He spent about 2 years in prison before the convictions were overturned and he was released. All 4 attacks were within 15 minutes walking distance of Mueller's house. There was one final attack committed by the man in the white hood. It happened the day after Sally Johnson was attacked. A man wearing a white sack on his head approached a couple in their car in Columbia. He forced them out of their car and led them half a mile away from it. The man's hands were tied up, and the woman was led to a different area where she was raped but left alive. No one has ever been charged in that case, but like the other 4 attacks, Robert Mueller is the strongest suspect. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please subscribe. We post a new video every Thursday and Sunday. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. The links are in the description below the video. But that's all for now. Thanks again for watching.